Hello and welcome to JavaScript Marathon Training presented by This.Labs. My name is Sarah Renaud with This.Labs, and I will be your host today. We're kicking today off this afternoon with automating GraphQL client code generation. Today's trainer is Kevin Wolf, Senior Software Engineer at This.Inc. Welcome, Kevin. You can find Kevin on Twitter using the handle shown at the bottom of the screen. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or feedback. And of course, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation, specializing in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. Do you find keeping up with the constantly evolving technologies a struggle? Do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? This.Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. Check out our upcoming special events. We do have monthly global meetups in Angular, GraphQL, React, and Vue. More details are available at this.co. And we are back next month. JavaScript Marathon returns Wednesday, December 5th. Stay tuned for more details. And with that, I will hand it on over to Kevin.
Hey, Sarah. I am super glad to be here. Thanks for the This.team for the invite. On this lightning talk, we will be doing a live coding exercise implementing GraphQL code generator to streamline our front-end development using Apollo client to generate type-safe GraphQL operations that we can consume in a Next.js application. This is the final example of what we will be building. We will be fetching data from the Rick and Morty API, and we will be creating a homepage where we will fetch a list of characters, show the image, the name, and the location, and then a secondary page where we can see details about the given character. We will leverage all the Apollo client features like caching, and we will be creating GraphQL React hooks, custom hooks that we will consume in our functional components. To start, sometimes when we are using Apollo client and we want to use it with TypeScript, we see that there is plenty of boilerplate code that we will need to be repeating among all the applications, like for example, declaring the interfaces, also declaring the inputs for each query, and also defining the query document. The benefits that GraphQL code generator gives us is that for a given schema, a given list of operations, and a given configuration, we can generate type-safe code, like the one that we are seeing here. We can generate types for each group type, for example, for the query, for the user, and also the basic types like the scalars and the query documents here. I will start by showing you this application that I did prepare. It's a very basic Next.js application that uses Tailwind to style it. This is a little disclaimer of I am using Next.js. I won't be doing static site generation or server-side rendering. I am instead using Next.js because of the benefits and easy adoption that it gave us to scaffold the React application. And we can use the built-in file system router to avoid it, just for these demo purposes, right? So this is the application that we have. We have the custom app where we are importing the styles. On the styles, we are just applying some basic style for the body element, and we are importing the Tailwind directives. Let's start by running yarn dev. This will start the development server and the port 3000. And this is where we will be previewing our application. Here we only have a home page with a title, and this is where we will start adding the content and the custom hooks. So let's start by taking a look at the documentation for GraphQL code him. We saw that we need a schema file. It can either be a local schema file or a remote schema file. In this case, I will be using this remote schema file that the Rick and Morty API provides us. We need an operation file. That is where we define the actual operations that we want to use in our application, and that will generate the custom hooks. So let's start by installing a couple of dependencies that our project will need. To start, we need GraphQL. GraphQL is needed both on the client and on the generator side because it will parse the remote schema, and also it's a dependency for the Apple client. Once we have the GraphQL client added as a dependency, we need to add the GraphQL code in CLI as a dev dependency. This will install a binary on the node modules folder, and that binary will be run by Yarn in order to create the configuration file, and also in order to pull the code from the remote schema and generate the custom hooks. Okay, now that it is installed, if we take a look at the node module folder on the bin subfolder, we have the GraphQL code him binary. We can either call that by passing the path, or we can use Yarn to run that binary. My personal preference is to use Yarn for that. Okay, now we need a codegen.yml file where we will specify the URL for the remote schema, the input file that we will use, and the output file where our custom hooks will be generated. So let's run Yarn GraphQL codegen init. This will start a wizard where we will be prompted with some questions. First, it's the kind of application we're building. The wizard, luckily, it's smart enough to detect that we are in a React project, so we will select React. Then, where is my schema located? This can be a local path or a URL. Since this is a remote schema, I will just paste this URL here. Where are operations and fragments? As the documentation shown, we need a local operation files. So I like to name this file operations.graphql. This will live on the project root. And the plugins. GraphQL codegen has this plugin ecosystem where we can use it to generate code for different kind of outputs. As in this case, we are using Apple client. We will be using the TypeScript plugin. This TypeScript plugin is required by other plugins that rely on TypeScript because this generates the root types according to our schema. For example, this will generate a character type, a location type, an episode type, and a query type. So we will select that. The TypeScript operations plugin, it's the one that shows the operation variables that it will need. For example, if the character query needs a parameter of ID, it will generate the type safe annotations for the function. On that way, we can be sure that we are not passing a number where a string is needed. In this case, ID, it's a scalar that it's a string on GraphQL land. The other one is the TypeScript React Apollo plugin. This plugin particularly is the one that generates the Apple client code and the custom hooks. Okay, let's mark this. And where to write the output file. It will suggest us to use the source folder, but since one of the conventions of Next.js is to have all source files on the root. We will omit this source, so let's just generate it. GraphQL.yes. In this case, we don't want to generate an introspection file because there is already the documentation in the node. How to name the config file, colhin.yml. This will create that file on the root. And what script in the package.json should run the colhin. This is like a shorthand to start the code generator by using yarn run or npm run. I like to use the generate command. As we see, this added the generate script to our package.json. Also added these dependencies, the GraphQL plugins. We have the TypeScript operations, and the TypeScript GraphQL plugin. Since this didn't run the install, we first need to return install to fetch the packages and install them into the node modules folder. Okay, it's done. If we go ahead and run the yarn generate script, we will see that it will give us an error because we still haven't defined the operation file. So let's just run it to see the error. It says that it is unable to find any GraphQL type definitions for the following pointers, which is the files that we defined here on this file. We can take a note that these documents can either be a relative path or a glob file. So if you have an application that is big enough and you don't want to put all your operations on the same GraphQL file, you can put, for example, a GraphQL folder and then put your files on a wildcard, and that will detect all GraphQL files within this GraphQL folder. Since this demo is small enough, we will use just a single file. Okay, so now we need to start adding our operations. And for that, we will use the GraphQL playground to see what we want to fetch from the remote schema. Let's create a query that will get the characters. This will call the characters field. Characters field has these results field, and for each result, it is a type of characters. So we run the ID, the image, name, also the location, and the location name. Let's run this query just to see that everything works. Okay, so here we have the results from the GraphQL API. What we will do is just copy this and paste it in our operations file. For that, we will create the file. And just paste the code. If we run the generator again, we will see that this time it won't fail, and the generated folder will be created with our GraphQL file. Let's just inspect what's added to this file. First, it imports the GQL function from the Apollo client package, which we still don't have. We will need to install it. And it does create the root types. It creates the scalars, it creates the query, also other fields needed by different queries, for example, the page and the filter for the get characters query, creates the type for the character, and all the types that depends on the character as well. Finally, it creates the document that it is the actual string that we pass to the Apollo use query hook, and it generates the code that we will just import in our functional components and run. Okay. Now, the next step is to install the Apollo client, because as we saw on this file, it was giving us an error that the module couldn't be found. So once it is installed, the warning will disappear. Let's go to the Apollo client configuration or the documentation to see what do we need. We need the Apollo client package and the GraphQL, which we already have installed. Next, we need to create the client and provide it to the application. For that, we will go to the add file, import Apollo client, and in memory cache, let's create the client. The URL will be the same as the one that we configured on the codecamp file, and the cache, it's a new memory cache. Now that we have the client, we import the Apollo provider and just grab our application with it. Okay, if you are used to, or if you have used Apollo client before, you will notice that if we don't provide the client as a context, then our custom hooks will fail because the client is not on the hook context. Okay, so now we can start actually calling the custom hooks. So open the home page and let's import from the generated GraphQL folder. We will import the use get characters query, and let's just call it and then log the result. Okay, so if we see the result of this console log, we will see that on the first log, it will have the loading property on true, data will be undefined, and on the second call, data will be defined as our API response, and loading will be false because it has been already fulfilled. Now we can take advantage of that and start building our UI. The UI will have a loading indicator and error handler just in case that anything goes wrong, and the actual characters list. We will start building that. Since we already know what the result object have, we can structure this and extract the loading, the error, and the data, first, and start adding our app content. But first, let's just find a nice loader to show. A library that I like using is these React spinners, and we will using this particular bit loader. So let's jump here and we'll turn React spinners. Until decide we can import it. And let's just start adding conditionals. So when it is loading, if it is loading, we will show a div, the class name of Xcenter, and div loader. Go here on refresh. The loader will be shown where the data comes. Next, let's say an error handler. If the error is defined, we will add a paragraph, text center, and text will be red, and let's say that error since our remote schema is working and it is fetching the right input, we won't see the error message here. But if we go to the app file and just change this to a string that we know we can fail, then we will see the error message. So we can move on. Now that we have the loading and error in place, let's just actually render the character list. So if data is defined, let's start by just rendering a preformat text. Okay. Now let's create a component to actually render the character list. I like to have these on separate components because that makes it easier to just compose it over the rest of the application and reuse it. And if we are using Storybook or something like that, we can just demo the component in isolation without needing to fetch the remote schema. So let's create different components. Let's create a character. Okay, so a viewer is saying that, yes, of course, I can increase the font size. Just let me know if that works. Okay. Okay. Now we will create the character of this component. But since we're using TypeScript, we want this component to be strongly typed. On a word where we're using the GraphQL code generator, we will need to maintain these types individually and just start importing them and maintaining the type definition files. But thanks to the GraphQL generator, these types are actually generated based on operations. So if we look the character script, this is the type resulting from the data property. So let's create a component. So let's first import the type from generated GraphQL. The get character query. Create a component. This will receive a data prop, and for that we will use the get character query. Characters within it and the results, because that is how the object that comes from the API looks like. We have data, characters, and results is the actual array that we will be passing to this character, this component. That's really the performance text here. And import the component here. And if data is defined, we just call character list component, replace the data, the characters, that results array. Okay, and now let's just build a basic UI for this using Tailwind. The flex item, that's container, which will stack our list one on top of each other. And let's use the CSS gag property to create a spacing between each of them. Let's iterate over all the data. This will create a div where each character will be shown using a dark background, and it will be rounded and it will have a slide box shadow. We can bring it here just to see it works. Okay. And we want to run the image of the character. One of the advantages of having all this type, the type generated, is that we have this auto completion. And if, for example, if I try to pass a property that doesn't exist on the character field, then it will, TypeScript will yell at us. And now let's just show the character location. Okay, so here we have, just to recap a little bit, in case someone just joined the streaming, we generated this hook by using the GraphQL code generator and using the operations.graphql file as the single source of truth. This file is the one that is in charge of both generating the custom hooks, generating the reusable TypeScript types that we will use on our function components, and we will use that to type check that everything is working properly. And we are not using, for example, any property that doesn't exist on the character type. Now that we have the home screen, we see that it is not like, it's mobile first, but the design doesn't look so good. So let's just make it a little bit responsive. Thanks to CSS, thanks to Tailwind, we can add properties that from the mode viewports and above, it will change the display to the display grid. Also on small viewports, it will have 2 columns. On medium viewports, it will have 3 columns. And on large viewports, it will have 4 columns. Okay, so our homepage, it's ready, but now we want to create the character page. For that, let's first go to the GraphQL playground and see what do we need to create to fetch a single character. There is this character query that receives an ID via a parameter and returns the found character on the database. So let's just build that query. This query will receive an ID parameter, which is an ID. to fetch the character, which is ID. And let's fetch the image, the name, the location name, and a list of episodes where it does appears. If we fetch this, it will tell us because the ID variable is declared, so it's an ID here, and we will have the character with ID1, then ID2, and so on and so forth. Let's copy that to our operations file. And run the generator again. This will create the useGetCharacter query, which with all his dependencies like the getCharacter query, the getCharacter query variables. This is super useful when we are, for example, getting this ID from an input. If this is an ID, and if we take a look at the scalars ID, the ID is a string. So if we are not typecasing, we are getting a number, and we are sending that to the GraphQL API, then TypeScript will warn us that that is impossible, and we may need to transform that number to a string. Okay. Let's create a new page on the page folder, and name it on the folder name character. For the ones that are not too familiar with Next.js, this is a feature that the file system router uses. This means that we can call this URL by passing character, and then any text or any string that we want, that will be assigned to an ID property of an object on the query. Let's read the character page. It doesn't receive any props, and let's do the character page text. Now that we have this, we want a way to link to this page. We're on the character page, but there is no way to navigate to that page without typing the URL. So let's make these items clickable. For that, I will open the character list file and import the link component. And next. So now, instead of a wrapping div, we will wrap each character with a link. And this will be the component with the key, with the unique key. So React will know how to differentiate between all the children. This link component also needs the href, which is the URL that it will navigate to. It was character / character ID. And finally, let's just change this div to an anchor. Now, this will go to character 1, character 2, character 3, so on and so forth. Okay, so how do we extract this ID from the URL? Locally, Next.js offers this custom hook that we can import from the Next router package within this router, and we can structure the query object from the router. And if we log the query, we will see that the ID will be 1 or maybe 10, or whatever ID that we pass here. Now on the character page, let's repeat the steps that we did on the home page and call the custom hook. For that, I will import from the generated GraphQL file, we use get character query and call that from here. Since this is already typed, as we type, it will suggest us the properties that we can include. For example, if we open the auto-completion here, we see that we can call the variables, and even the variable that we need to call will be typed, which is the ID. We will use the ID from query.id. However, since the use router, the query object, it's an URL params, it says that it can either be a string or an array of strings. So let's just force this to be a string. And let's try the loading error data from the hook result. And let's build our UI. Always, I will uppercase then I will add a link, make you navigable to the home page again. Let's style this a little bit. Hopefully it will get a little bit better. It is loading, we can load those when we leave the home page. If there is an error, let's show it. And finally, if data is defined, let's start by showing the format text with data. This is because the character with the ID of 2000 doesn't exist, so our error handling is in place. Let's create a final component in the component folder. The name will be character detail, and we can start importing from the generated GraphQL file. Let's import the get character query. Get character query. And let's create a component, the character detail. The data prop will come from the get character query, the character field. let's remove this performance text and render the character equal when data is defined. Data dot character. Okay, next. The final step will be just to copy the UI that we created on the character list component, because it will be really similar. We don't want an anchor here, so it will be with, and instead of character, the name of this property will be data. We have, for example, JS from where replacement dimension. And finally, let's just add the episodes list. Flex container, flex column, 3. It's extra large to the font. Alt. This for this. Again, will be flex. It will be flex column, and it will have a gap of 1. Now we just iterate over data episode. There's going to be an episode variable, and we're inserting the key of the episode ID, and it's the episode name. Maybe also the episode number. So now we bring our text here. And show the and with that we finish our live coding exercise, where we, just to recap, we leverage the GraphQL code generator to have just a single source of truth, which is our operations file. From that operations file, we generate both TypeScript type declarations and also typed custom hooks that under the hood calls the Apollo client and fetches the data for us. Moving forward, if you are not or if you don't like using Apollo client, there is plenty of other tools that you can leverage and use with the GraphQL code generator. For example, there is the also for Vue, for Angular, for Stencil, but there is also a client for URQL, which is a library that has become really popular in the GraphQL ecosystem. And if you are not using data fetching on application runtime at all, let's say that, for example, you wanted to make this a static site rather than a single page application, and use the Next.js get static props function, you could use the GraphQL request client, and this generates the interface that you just grab and import and consume from the get static props or get static paths functions. Sarah, I think that with that we conclude the talk. If anyone has any question, just I will be taking a look at the chat. Any, I don't know, any question?
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. That was an amazing chat. Yes, we did have a question. I think it got answered. Dennis asked, what IDE are you using? So
what IDE?
Yeah. I think we might be having some technical difficulties. Let me see if I can get Kevin back. As we wait, if you guys have any more questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. we'll see if we can get those answered for you. We do have a couple more minutes left. Okay. So while we're waiting for Kevin to come back up, we do have one more session today. So we are presenting Josh Oppenheim's next session. So that will actually be at 3 p.m. or 2 p.m. Pacific time and 5 p.m. Eastern time. He's actually going to be presenting on building GraphQL resolvers. So please make sure you stick around for that. And we have a couple more minutes if you guys want to drop any questions in there. If Kevin doesn't get back to us now, I'm sure he'll be able to come back on and chat with you guys a little bit. He also has a Twitter handle, so get a hold of him there. And thank you all so much for joining us. Again, we are back at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern time for building GraphQL resolvers. So go ahead and get a snack, take a break, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.